Hi friends. Today is a very interesting story from Reddit. Don't forget to rate the video, it's very important. Let's get started. Practicality of small spaces. The main advantage of the small apartment was its practicality. The agent, a woman with perfectly straight teeth, called it cozy, intimate, a cocoon for the modern urbanite. What it really meant was one thing. The apartment was cheap. So cheap it felt criminal. The apartment, located in a converted textile factory, was a single open space. The tiled and chrome bathroom was the only separate room. Everything else was one. Concrete floors, exposed brick, and drywall painted a dirty grey. The building was steel and concrete. Most of the time, it was quite quiet. No creaks, no groans, no hum of an old house. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic thrum of the HVAC system, a sound so constant it became background noise. The first strangeness was the dresser, a simple IKEA mound dresser. I noticed it on a Tuesday. I'm a creature of habit. When I clean, I pull the dresser 2 inches from the wall to reach the corner with the vacuum. Then I push it back, flush against the wall. But that Tuesday, the dresser was 4 inches out. I blinked, pushed it back, decided I'd been distracted and forgotten to move it. But the next week, it was out again. And the week after, and again. Like something was expanding behind the wall, pushing the dresser with slow, patient pressure. Another strangeness, the niche in the ceiling. A small drywall space in the closet ceiling, barely big enough for a child. The access panel had an old ring pull. The building inspector called it plumbing access, though the pipes ran along the opposite wall. It was a dead space, an architectural leftover. I pulled the ring once, just out of curiosity. The panel didn't budge.
Then a month later, I noticed the ring was greasy. A dark, slick residue faintly smelling of metal and sour sweat. It stayed on my fingertips when I touched it. It wasn't oil, something thicker, more organic, like bicycle chain grease, but with a faint, coppery smell. One evening, I went into the bathroom to shower and noticed the small 10-inch transom window above the shower was open. It didn't alarm me too much. I sometimes left it open. Maybe I forgot to close it. And then I started hearing the sounds. It wasn't a ghostly moan or strange footsteps. It was a wet, muffled knocking. The sound of joints cracking, but slower, deeper, with a fleshy, cartilaginous resistance. I heard it late at night from the ceiling, or caught it behind the sound of the TV, coming from somewhere beyond the wall. I called my landlord, but he brushed it off, said it was the pipes. But it was the sound of a body contorting, a sound that made the ligaments in my knees ache. I started sleeping less. The practicality of the small space now felt not like an advantage, but a trap. One morning, I had bruises on my right forearm and both shins. Not the accidental marks of clumsy impact. They were symmetrical, perfectly oval, finger-sized, a deep, painful purple bleeding into a bilious yellow. My doctor, an older woman with a distracted smile, called them pressure marks. Like a heavy, narrow object was pressed against you for a long time, she said, tapping her pen on my chart. Maybe in your sleep? But I had no heavy, narrow objects. I had a bed, a blanket, and the suffocating closeness of the walls. The bruises looked like pressure points, precise places a hand would brace to hold a body still. The realization was so disgusting it felt physical. Something was being done to me in my sleep. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I set traps around the apartment, a thread carefully laid across the threshold of the door. A dime balanced on its edge on the living room baseboard. The thread would disappear. The dime would fall. The evidence was microscopic, but undeniable. It had to be a draft, vibration, anything but the logical, screaming conclusion forming in the back of my mind. My suspicion turned to paranoia. I cleaned obsessively, not for hygiene, but searching for something. One day I was dusting the radiator, a bulky cast iron relic from the factory days, and my fingers found something tucked behind it. Not dust, not a dead insect, a piece of paper. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It was a photograph, low resolution and blurry, printed on thick paper, but I swear it was me. The image was fuzzy, but I couldn't mistake it. Through the dark grain, I could barely make myself out, sleeping in my bed. The shot was taken from the ceiling, looking down. I looked up, tracing the line of sight. The photo was taken from the ventilation grate, an 8 by 10-inch metal grate flush with the ceiling. Its slats were too narrow to fit a hand through. To take the picture, the grate would have had to be removed. I called the police. They arrived in 5 minutes. "I'm not doubting you, ma'am," the officer said. He was young, patient, measured, which for some reason irritated me. "But there's no sign of forced entry. Your door is fine. No signs of a window break-in. No prints on the radiator." "Because he doesn't use the door," I said, the words bitter in my throat. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. That look said more than words. They thought I was crazy, thought I had a persecution complex. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the officer said, his tone carrying a finality that was clearly dismissive. After they left, I locked the door. I wedged a chair under the handle, a symbolic barrier against an enemy who didn't need doors, just to comfort myself. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I wanted to run away, but I had nowhere to go. A few nights later, drunk on cheap whiskey, I lay in bed listening. The building was quiet. The hum of the HVAC, my anchor, had stopped. I strained to hear the clicking sounds, the muffled, wet pops. Nothing. The silence was worse. I needed to get out, even for a few minutes. I pulled on my shoes. My movements felt clumsy and loud in the silence. The building hallway was a concrete tomb, my footsteps echoing. The heavy steel building door screeched open, and I felt something like relief. The night air was cool, a breeze on my face. I just needed to walk around the block, feel free. I was gone 10 minutes, maybe 15. As I headed back to the building, a sick feeling crept over me. I tried to convince myself I had no reason to be anxious, but standing at my apartment door, my heart was pounding. I turned the key and pushed the door open. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Almost. The kitchen light was on, the single bare bulb over the sink. I never left it on. My breath caught. I froze in the doorway. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't the empty silence from before. It was a heavy, waiting silence, the silence of a predator waiting for its prey. I scanned the room. Everything was in place. The bed unmade, the dresser flush against the wall. But the kitchen light was on. I took a step forward, my footsteps deafeningly loud. I needed a weapon. I needed to reach the kitchen. I crept forward. I could already see the knife block, the dark wooden handle of the big chef's knife jutting out. I was almost there. My eyes darted around the room, trying to find something real, something to anchor me, to prove I wasn't imagining it. And I saw it.
The kickboard under the kitchen cabinets. The thin strip of wood covering the space between the bottom of the cabinets and the floor.
It had scratches running from it, disappearing into the darkness. It was pulled loose. Just a little, just a tiny gap. A 4-inch sliver of darkness that hadn't been there when I left. I froze. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked onto that gap. An impossibly narrow gap. A space too small for even a child, let alone a grown man. I held my breath, listened, and then I saw it. A hand. It had unnaturally long, spider-like fingers, each tipped with a dirt-caked nail. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched over thin bones. It moved with a strange, jerky purposefulness, slid out of the gap, palm pressing against the floor. Then another hand joined it. They pressed down on the floor, and with a series of sickening, rhythmic pops, something began to emerge. It wasn't a monster. It was worse. A man. He unfolded from the darkness, taking a fluid, impossible shape. Thin, middle-aged, in a sweat-stained undershirt and worn pants. His collarbones seemed to overlap, his hips rotating at angles that contradicted anatomy. He looked like a human origami, a mockery of the laws of the body. I watched in stunned, horrified silence as he unfolded, the wet, muffled pops I'd been hearing for weeks now sounding close, right in front of me. He saw me. His eyes, deep-set and still, yellowish, widened in horror. He was afraid of me. I screamed, a raw, guttural cry tearing from my throat. I lunged for the knife block, my fingers closing around the handle of the chef's knife. The man scrambled away, his panicked, disjointed gait horrifying and grotesque. He made a sound, not quite human, not quite animal, something else, something utterly impossible. He moved with terrifying speed, in jerks and spasms. He was like a spider, a cockroach, a thing that lived in cracks and crevices. He didn't run for the door. He ran for the bathroom. I chased him, knife held out like a talisman. He was in the bathroom, the room so small I could reach all 4 walls at once. I saw him scramble for the transom window. I thought he'd get stuck. I prayed he'd get stuck. But he fit. With a sharp, piercing pop that echoed in the tiny room, his shoulders dislocated. He didn't even flinch. His torso twisted unnaturally, his head lolling, and he slipped through the opening like a snake into a burrow. He was gone. I stood there, shaking, the knife dangling uselessly in my hand. I stared at the window, at the small, dark opening a man had just fit through. I sat in the corner of my apartment, clutching the knife, back against the wall. I watched the door, watched the windows, watched the baseboard. I strained to hear the clicks, the muffled, wet pops. Nothing. The apartment was silent, empty. I called the police again. They took a report. They looked at the window, looked at the kickboard. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They didn't believe me, of course. I barely believed it myself. That evening, I packed my things and got a hotel room. 2 weeks later, a detective called me. He said the police had caught the man. He was found hiding in the insulation of a local elementary school. A janitor spotted him, heard a strange clicking sound coming from the ceiling. The man's name was Reuben Cook. He was 44 and had once worked on a specialized building demolition crew. He had a rare connective tissue disorder, a condition that made his joints hyperflexible, his skin unnaturally elastic. A man who could fit into spaces too small for a normal person. The detective, a man with a tired, dreary voice, told me about Cook's history. He was a commensal predator, a parasite. He lived for months in the empty spaces of apartments, feeding on scraps, watching the occupants. His history was a string of disturbing incidents. He had previously been imprisoned for climbing into a woman's car trunk and waiting 3 days for her to drive to a secluded spot. 3 years ago, holed up in an apartment, he killed the occupant because he tried to install a shelf that would have blocked his hiding place. As the detective spoke, I felt a strange, cold detachment. Relief mixed with a lingering, crushing dread. He was caught. The nightmare was over. But then the detective said something that made a chill run down my spine. "We found Cook's collection in the walls of your apartment," he said. "Collection?" I asked, barely a whisper. "He kept, shall we say, souvenirs, items that belonged to the occupants of the apartments he lived in. They were things of yours, a toothbrush, strands of hair, and a spare key." I felt the blood drain from my face. The spare key. I'd lost it months ago. I'd torn the apartment apart looking for it. Useless. He'd had it the whole time. He could have come and gone as he pleased, but he didn't. He chose to stay in the walls. He chose to be a ghost. More than that, I realized he'd cut my hair while I slept, when I was most vulnerable. I suppose that's why I had the bruises. What strange compulsion made him keep my hair? And why a toothbrush? "We also did a medical exam," the detective continued, lowering his voice to a quiet, confidential tone. "He didn't just have the condition. He'd had surgery to remove his floating ribs and had his pelvis filed down. He didn't want to be a man anymore. He wanted to be a shape. And he was in your walls from the day you signed the lease." The lease. The low price, too low. The lease I'd signed in haste, not suspecting anything. It bound me to this place, this prison, for a year. A year of being watched.
A year of being a specimen in a cage. I hung up without saying goodbye. I couldn't breathe. The hotel room, with its unremarkable prints and beige carpet, felt like a cell. I couldn't sleep that night. I live in a new house now. It's small but open plan. No basement, no attic, no crawl space. Just space. Empty, blessed space. I have a security system. I have a dog. I have a therapist. I have everything a person is supposed to have to feel safe. But it's not enough. My friends haven't helped much. They started giving Reuben Cook nicknames like it was a joke. "Flat Stanley," one joked at a dinner party, prompting a ripple of laughter. Another called him the Origami Man. The name stuck, and it gnaws at me more and more each day. I know they mean well, but they can't understand. The memories are parasites, burrowing deeper into my brain each day. I can't sleep without a light on. I can't take a shower without checking the bathroom and keeping my phone nearby with 911 already dialed. I can't be without a weapon. Can't pass a vent without feeling a phantom pressure on my skin. Sometimes my scalp itches. A ghost sensation of a strand of hair being plucked. I still smell the sour, coppery grease on the ring pool in the closet ceiling. Last night, I heard the faint groan of floorboards, a slight creak from the ceiling. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. I grabbed a ruler from my desk and started measuring. The gap under the front door, the space between the floor and the baseboards, the gap under the kitchen cabinets. I measured everything, hands shaking, breath catching. The rational part of my mind knew it was just the house. normal sounds of a structure, adjusting to temperature and humidity. But the other part of my mind, the part Cook reprogrammed, knew better. It knew a man doesn't need a door to enter a room. It knew a man doesn't need much space to exist.
It knew the world is full of cracks and crevices, dead spaces and forgotten corners. It knew that no matter how small the bars of the cage, there is a chance they won't hold the inhuman thing that can take any shape. And the feeling haunts me that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of this new house, he is perfecting his craft, folding himself into smaller and smaller shapes, waiting. I still have nightmares. I wake up drenched in sweat, my hands checking my shins, my arms for bruises. I still hear the clicks, the wet, muffled pops. Sometimes, in the shadows, I see an emaciated face, sunken yellow eyes, an impossibly thin body. The detective's words echo in my head. He didn't want to be a man anymore. He wanted to be a shape. A shape that could slip away. A shape that could hide in plain sight. A shape that could be anywhere and everywhere. Right now, I'm at my kitchen table, morning sun streaming through the window. The ruler is still on the table. I've been measuring all morning. I measured everything. I wrote the numbers down in a notebook. I'll measure everything again tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after. Because I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Reuben Cook had a reason to watch me for so long, even if I didn't know what that reason was. And I don't believe he would have given me up so easily. So every time I hear a floorboard creak, every time I feel a draft under the door, the same thought comes to mind. With a cold, nauseating dread, I wonder just how much space a man really needs to hide.
How did you like today's episode? Don't forget to rate the video. Thanks, and see you soon.